Usually when people talk about um, the pinnacle of a scientific or academic career, there is this massive unspoken assumption about what actually matters most.
Right. Everyone just points straight to the prestige.
Exactly. I mean, the dream is to get that acceptance letter from an Ivy League university or to, land on this brilliantly complex world-changing research question. And once you have those two things, society just kind of assumes you've got it made. The path is set.
Yeah, it's really the Hollywood version of academia. You picture the historic ivy-covered brick buildings, the brilliant eureka moment in a sparkling lab, and you just assume the rest of the career naturally falls into place.
But the reality on the ground, like inside those actual labs, is entirely different. The most critical decision in a scientific or academic career isn't the research question you choose. And it certainly isn't the brand name of the university stamped on your degree.
No, not at all.
The single most important decision you will ever make is choosing your mentor.
That choice dictates absolutely everything. I mean, a PhD or a postdoc is not a series of classes. It is the ultimate professional apprenticeship.
Right.
And who you apprentice under will absolutely determine the next 4 to 6 years of your life, the state of your mental health, and, well, the entire trajectory of your future career.
So today, our mission for this deep dive is to navigate the intensely high-stakes matchmaking game of choosing a thesis supervisor. Because whether you are actively eyeing grad school right now, or you just want to understand the hidden dynamics of high-level professional mentoring, because the psychology here really applies everywhere, consider this your ultimate survival guide.
Yeah, and to unpack the mechanics of this, we are drawing on two incredibly grounded, highly practical sources today. The first is a paper called 10 Simple Rules for Choosing a PhD Supervisor.
Oh, I love that one.
It's great, right. It was published in PLOS Computational Biology in 2021 by Loe Jabre and a team of biology graduate students at Dalhousie University.
Which I think is so important because it is written from the fresh, raw perspective of students who have just lived through the trenches of this exact process. I mean, they aren't sugarcoating anything at all.
Not even a little bit. And we are pairing that student perspective with a really fantastic framework from the mentor side called The X Factors of PhD Supervision. This was published in the European Journal of Cardiovascular Nursing in 2022 by Britt Beauregard and the Science Committee of the Association of Cardiovascular Nursing and Allied Professions, or ACNAP for short.
Okay, got it.
And while it was originally written to build research capacity in European allied health, meaning professions like, specialized nursing, physiotherapy, and clinical dietetics, the insights into human management are universally applicable across literally any discipline.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because we really need to treat this massive professional choice with the rigor it actually deserves. We're going to start right where everyone starts, which is looking up a potential supervisor's research online.
The classic first step.
Right. You go to their lab website, you look at the glossy photos of smiling students in safety goggles, you read the flashy project descriptions. But both of our sources are practically screaming at us that this surface-level search is a trap. Why is relying on a lab website so dangerous?
Well, lab websites are notoriously outdated, and it's largely due to the brutal mechanics of academic funding. Science moves incredibly fast, and grant cycles dictate literally everything.
Yeah.
But updating a faculty webpage is usually at the absolute bottom of a professor's to-do list. So you might look at a supervisor's site and see this incredible, cutting-edge CRISPR gene editing work prominently featured.
The kind of flashy, headline-grabbing science that looks great on a university brochure.
Exactly. You see that and you might think, wow, this is exactly what I want to dedicate my life to. But the reality could be that they haven't touched that CRISPR project in 3 years.
Wait, 3 years?
Easily. The grant money dried up, the postdoc running it left, and the principal investigator has shifted their entire lab's focus to something completely different just to keep the lights on.
Oh, wow. So if the website is essentially a time capsule, how do you actually find out what they're doing today?
The PLOS authors provide a brilliant sleuthing hack for this. You completely bypass the website and look directly at the supervisor's recent publication profile on a database like PubMed or Google Scholar.
Okay, makes sense.
But you don't just look at any paper with their name on it. In the life sciences, you specifically filter for recent publications where they are the senior author.
And just for those unfamiliar with the unspoken rules of academic publishing, the senior author is typically the very last name listed on the paper.
Right.
That placement is highly significant, right? It means it's their lab, it's their grant money funding the actual research.
Precisely. If they're the last author on a paper published 3 months ago, That paper represents where their group's funding and brainpower actually reside today. It completely cuts through the marketing and gives you a real-time, undeniable map of their scientific direction.
That makes perfect sense. But, even if you use that hack and find out what they're actually working on today, there's a harsh reality check we have to talk about. The PLOS paper explicitly points out that you have to love the grunt work,
Yes, the grunt work.
which I just think is a phenomenal concept to highlight. It's like loving the idea of being a Michelin star chef, but absolutely hating chopping onions or cleaning grease traps.
That is a great way to put it.
Right. It's so easy to get starry-eyed over the grand idea of, like, curing cardiovascular disease.
Yeah.
But a student really needs to look at the methods section of those recent papers first, don't they?
They absolutely have to, yeah. Because the methods section of a published paper is the literal instruction manual for what your daily, minute-by-minute life is actually going to look like. The grand overarching topic, the cure for the disease, is only what you think about when you're writing a grant proposal or maybe presenting at a conference twice a year.
Right, it's the big picture stuff.
Exactly. But the methods section is what you are actually doing on a rainy Tuesday afternoon in November.
So if the methods involve complex computational modeling, your grunt work isn't like swirling colorful liquids in a beaker. It's spending 8 hours a day resolving cryptic coding errors, debugging software, and just staring at a terminal screen.
And if your personality dictates that you hate staring at terminal screens, a computational project will feel like an absolute prison to you. It won't matter how prestigious the lab is or how groundbreaking the final result might be.
Yeah, that sounds miserable.
It is. You have to ensure the physical daily tasks suit your actual temperament, or you will burn out way before you ever reach that eureka moment.
Okay, so let's say you found a mentor whose daily grunt work matches your temperament. You don't mind chopping the metaphorical onions,
Right.
but the daily grind is only half the battle. The other half is how much autonomy you have while doing it. Which brings us to this really massive dilemma regarding the size of the lab and the experience of the supervisor.
Yeah, and this is where the ACNA guidelines really shine, particularly their focus on a supervisor's academic and clinical experience. They highlight that an experienced late-career mentor brings a really vital baseline to the table. They have proven protocols.
And secure funding, right?
Exactly. Secure, established funding streams that insulate the lab from sudden financial shocks.
Because, they've already made their worst management mistakes on previous generations of students. An experienced supervisor has actually had the time to evolve and refine how they manage people. They're far less likely to just blindly repeat whatever outdated, toxic supervision style they received back in the 1980s.
Very true. But the PLOS paper points out a super fascinating trade-off here. Choosing an early career supervisor versus a late career one fundamentally alters the kind of science you will actually do.
How all?
Well, if you go with an early career supervisor, someone who just opened their lab, for instance, they're usually highly energized. They are physically present in the lab with you, standing at the bench, pipetting right alongside you. You basically get to help them build their entire operation from the ground up.
Which sounds incredibly exciting. But they probably don't have that deep, entrenched political power within the university yet, do they?
They don't know, and that political capital is a highly invisible mechanism that drastically affects students. A senior professor can make a bureaucratic HR problem disappear with one phone call, or they can easily secure an extension on a funding deadline just because they play golf with the dean.
Right.
A junior professor is often totally paralyzed by that same administration.
Wow, okay.
Yeah.
Whereas a senior supervisor in a massive, established lab might have practically limitless funding and this huge, sprawling professional network you can tap into for your postdoc. But the downside is you are a tiny cog in a very large machine.
Exactly. You might only see your actual supervisor once a month at a giant group meeting.
So what does this all mean for the actual science that gets produced?
The PLOS authors make a very sharp observation about the mechanics of discovery here. Large, established labs are phenomenal for developing and refining existing research. They have the massive machinery and capital required to push a known paradigm to its absolute limit.
Okay, so they refine.
Yes. But smaller labs, which are often run by newer supervisors, are frequently where more disruptive, high-impact research happens. They don't have the machinery to compete on scale, so they have to take much bigger risks to establish their reputation in the field.
That is so interesting. It really forces you to hold a mirror up to yourself and be brutally honest about how you operate. Like, you have to ask yourself, Do you thrive on high autonomy, or do you need structured, hands-on guidance? Are you willing to trade the isolation of a massive, well-funded lab for the disruptive, chaotic potential of a small one?
And there is no universally correct answer to that. It is entirely about diagnosing what environment you specifically need to thrive.
But even if the lab size is perfect, and the daily grunt work actually sounds fun, there's a silent killer that ruins more PhDs than bad science mismatched assumptions.
Oh, absolutely.
Students are often so terrified to talk about money or timelines because it feels somehow, I don't know, unscientific to care about paying rent.
Yeah, in academia, there's this pervasive, almost romanticized notion that you should be a martyr for the science.
Right.
But the authors of both papers are extremely clear that you must break this taboo immediately. You have to sit down and discuss money and timelines before you ever commit to a lab.
Because you cannot do good science if you cannot buy groceries. It's just a fundamental biological reality. You have to ask them directly, what is the minimum take-home stipend? Is that stipend actually livable in the specific city where the university is located, given the current inflation rates?
Exactly.
What are the hard funding cutoffs if the project takes 5 years instead of 4? What is the lab's contingency plan if their primary grant money runs dry halfway through your thesis?
The AC and App paper really drills down into how mismatches in these specific expectations are the single biggest driver of student anxiety. And it's not just about financial compensation either. It's about time and responsibility.
What's an example of that?
Take the turnaround time tension, for example. What's fascinating here is how often this happens. A student finishes a draft of a critical paper and sends it to their supervisor. Then it just disappears into a black hole on the supervisor's desk for 3 months.
Oh, man. I want to use the supply chain analogy here because that's really what a PhD is, right?
Mm-hmm.
The student is the factory producing the data, but the supervisor is the quality control bottleneck.
That's a great way to look at it.
If that draft disappears into a black hole, the entire assembly line completely stops. The student's graduation timeline is actively ticking away, their funding is burning down, while the paper is just sitting unread in an inbox.
And this bottleneck happens almost universally because neither party sat down on day one and established a baseline expectation for feedback timelines. The student just assumed a 1-week turnaround. Meanwhile, the supervisor, who is managing 20 other projects, assumed a 3-month turnaround was perfectly normal.
Wow, so to solve this, ACNP recommends establishing a contractual framework or a written agreement of supervision right at the start, which I just love. It is basically a prenuptial agreement for science.
That's exactly what it is.
It sounds painfully unromantic to sit down and write out, you will return my drafts within 14 days and I will produce this specific amount of data per month. But it is entirely necessary to prevent catastrophic heartbreak down the line.
It really creates a foundational layer of professional accountability. When those expectations are formalized, it completely removes the guesswork and the silent resentment that poisons so many mentoring relationships.
I would even push to include professional development in this science prenup, because the PLOS and ACNAP papers both emphasize that a PhD shouldn't just be about generating data for the boss.
No, not at all.
You need to ask, like, will you fund my travel to attend international workshops? Will you let me pause my research to do a 3-month industry internship? ACNAPT specifically highlights the need for post-PhD career help, too. Is this supervisor going to leverage their network to write you recommendation letters and actually help you navigate the job market, or do they just drop you the second your thesis is filed?
And knowing what clauses you want in this contract is great, but how do you verify if this potential supervisor will actually honor any of it? You can't just take their word for it during a friendly, low-stakes introductory chat. You have to conduct a serious interview.
Right, but if you're listening to this and currently applying for grad school, the idea of interrogating your potential boss probably sounds terrifying. You're probably thinking, I don't have the leverage to do that. I'm just hoping they pick me.
And that is a massive misconception that the PLOS authors explicitly try to dismantle. PhD students perform a staggering portion of the actual ground-level academic research output in the entire world. You are a highly valuable, highly skilled asset to them. You are not a supplicant begging for a favor.
Yes, because you are an asset, you have actual leverage. You need to use the interview process to evaluate them just as stringently as they're evaluating you.
The PLOS authors also warn against faking a perfect candidate act during this interview. Like, if you pretend to be someone who loves working 80-hour weeks and coming in on Sundays just to impress them, you are totally trapping yourself.
Aye, because then they expect it.
Exactly. You will have to maintain that exhausting, soul-crushing act for the next 5 years.
So you really have to be your authentic self.
Mhm.
But to find out who the supervisor really is behind their polished interview persona, you have to activate an intel network. You have to go meet the current students in the lab.
You do, but you have to be highly strategic about how you interpret what they say. Because current students are entirely dependent on that supervisor for their funding, their graduation approval, and their future career letters of recommendation.
That's a lot of power.
It is. So if the supervisor is toxic, those students might be far too scared of retaliation to honestly tell a prospective student the truth.
Right. You can't expect them to look a total stranger in the eye and say, "Run for your life, our boss is a nightmare."
Yeah.
They will absolutely sugarcoat it. So you have to ask specific behavioral questions that basically bypass the generic pleasantries.
Yes.
Instead of asking a lazy question like, "Is the supervisor nice?" the PLOS paper advises asking things like, "How do they actually react when an experiment fails?" or "What is their biggest weakness as a manager?"
Those behavioral questions force a specific memory. If you ask how they react to a failed experiment, and the student hesitates, looks nervously at the door, and says, well, they get pretty intense, you have just gathered crucial, unvarnished data about the emotional climate of that lab.
But here's where it gets really interesting. This is the ultimate espionage tip from the deep dive. If current students are too compromised by their dependence on the boss, you go talk to the past students.
Yes. Brilliant.
Past students are out of the blast radius. They have their degrees in hand, they have their industry jobs, they have zero reason to lie to you. And the PLOS paper gives this incredible sleuthing hack. Go to the university repository and read the acknowledgement section of previous students' theses.
It is such a brilliant, highly quantifiable metric because the acknowledgement section of a thesis is the one place where a student has complete, uncensored freedom to express their gratitude or their lack thereof.
It's essentially the hidden metadata of a student's mental health over the last 5 years. You can instantly tell the difference between a generic, legally required one-sentence, "I thank my supervisor for their guidance," and a heartfelt two-page tribute to a mentor who fundamentally changed their life and supported them through hardship.
Oh, absolutely.
If you pull up 3 past theses from a lab, and they all just have a single cold sentence thanking the boss, well, you have your answer.
The ultimate reason you are gathering all this intelligence, reading between the lines and acting like an investigative journalist, is to protect your mental health. Academia, unfortunately, has a really pervasive toxic culture in many corners that just cannot be ignored.
The stakes here are genuinely life-altering. The PLOS data points out that graduate students suffer from disproportionately higher rates of depression and severe anxiety compared to the general public.
Right. And drawing heavily on the ACN-APP framework, they explicitly state that a supervisor must provide more than just brilliant scientific direction. They really must possess emotional intelligence and actively cultivate a psychologically safe environment.
Let's define that, actually, because psychological safety can sound like empty corporate jargon. What does it actually look like in a functioning lab?
It means the mechanics of admitting a mistake don't trigger a crisis. It means if you accidentally cross-contaminate a batch of crucial biological samples, or if you find a mathematical bug in your code that completely invalidates the last 3 months of your statistical data, your first reaction isn't sheer, paralyzing panic about how your supervisor will punish you.
That makes total sense.
In a psychologically safe environment, you can walk straight into their office, tell them the ugly truth, and their immediate reaction is, okay, the data is what the data is. How do we fix this? And what do we learn from the failure?
So how do you spot the environments that are the exact opposite of that? What are the mechanical red flags we need to look out for before we accept an offer?
Well, both papers outline several major systemic warning signs. First is the always-on expectation. If the lab culture dictates that you receive and are implicitly expected to answer emails at 11 p.m. on a Saturday, that is a severe red flag that will erode your sanity.
Oh, for sure.
Second is systematically poor completion rates. If a standard PhD program is designed for 4 years, but every single student in that specific lab is taking 7 or 8 years to finish, that is a systemic failure of the supervisor's project management, not a reflection of the student's intelligence.
What about stalling publications?
Yeah.
Why does that happen? Because usually It's not because the science itself is bad.
No, it's often a structural conflict of interest. A toxic or overly ambitious supervisor might hold on to a student's perfectly good data, refusing to publish it because they want to wait and bundle it into a massive, groundbreaking submission for a high-impact journal like Nature or Science to boost their own prestige.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, they completely ignore the fact that the student desperately needs 3 smaller, immediate publications just to meet their graduation requirements and get a job. The supervisor basically sacrifices the student's timeline for their own glory.
That is awful.
Mhm.
I do have a hard time with the ultimate advice the PLOS paper gives for dealing with this, though. Their rule is simply trust your gut. If a student sees these red flags during an interview, human nature is going to make them rationalize it. They're going to tell themselves, oh, the PI was just having a bad day, or I'm sure I can handle the pressure. How do you actually train yourself to walk away from a prestigious Ivy League opportunity just because your gut feels weird?
Well, we make those rationalizations because we want the shiny brand name so badly that we are willing to gaslight ourselves into ignoring danger. But human beings are incredibly adept at subconsciously processing subtle social cues.
So our brains know something is wrong before we do.
Exactly. If you leave an interview feeling drained, anxious, or fundamentally uneasy, your gut is processing behavioral data that your conscious mind is trying to ignore. To train yourself to trust it, you have to calibrate your internal detector.
And how do you calibrate it?
By interviewing with multiple labs, you cannot know what a truly excellent, supportive lab feels like if you have absolutely nothing to compare it to. You have to screen multiple groups across different departments or even different universities.
Which means you have to get over the guilt of wasting people's time. Students often feel terrible taking up hours of a prestigious professor's week, meeting their team, and then turning around and saying no.
You have to firmly reject that guilt. Supervisors fully expect top-tier candidates to be shopping around. It is simply the cost of doing business in academia. The few hours spent searching, interviewing, and declining offers is absolutely nothing compared to the years of your life, the damage to your mental health, and the derailment of your career that will result from committing to a toxic PhD experience.
So what does this all mean when we put all the pieces together?
Yeah.
The ultimate goal of this deep dive, and really the mission of both these fantastic papers from PLOS and ACMP, is to help you find those critical X factors. You want the academic track record, yes, but you absolutely need to pair with emotional intelligence. You have to establish clear, written expectations with a science prenup to avoid the supply chain bottlenecks of academia. And you have to trust your gut when it warns you about a toxic environment.
If you get this right, if you run this gauntlet successfully and choose wisely, the payoff is immense. The dynamic evolves beautifully. It stops being a traditional, hierarchical teacher-student relationship where you just do what you're told, and it becomes a true collaborative partnership between peers, tackling the hard, unsolved questions of science together.
Which is exactly what academia should be at its core. And I want to leave you with a final provocative thought to mull over. We've been talking entirely about academia today, applying these frameworks to PhDs. But what if we applied this rigorous, investigative supervisor selection framework to the traditional corporate world?
Oh, that's an interesting idea.
Right. Imagine a reality where it was standard practice during a corporate job interview to demand to speak to a hiring manager's past employees who have already left the company. Imagine drafting a contract of expectations for your new corporate boss regarding their emotional intelligence, their management of weekend emails, and their feedback turnaround times before you ever accept the job. It might completely revolutionize how we choose all of our jobs, not just our academic ones.
It would certainly force a massive overdue shift in corporate accountability because bad management often just hides in the shadows of assumed authority.
It absolutely would. So as you prepare for your next big career step, whether that's applying to grad school, pivoting into a new corporate role, or anything in between, approach it with the eyes of a true investigator. Remember, the real prestige isn't the shiny name on the building. It's the character of the person sitting across from you. Thanks for joining